You last can Corla. Tánaiste, first of all, can I say that I very much welcome the fact that Ireland proposes to recognise the State of Palestine with some of our European colleagues before the end of the month. And I believe that your work and leadership in this matter has been very positive. However, today I want to raise another issue that is very important, and that is the EU-Israel trade agreement. I've raised it many times in this House. I've written to the Commission. I've spoken to you about it. What are we doing to try and move forward that this agreement is reviewed and, I believe, should be suspended?
Thank the Deputy for kind comments. And as the Deputy is aware, the then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain wrote to the President of the European Commission on the 14th of February of this year, requesting an urgent review of whether Israel is complying with its human rights obligations under the European Union-Israel Association Agreement. The letter further requested that the Commission propose appropriate measures for the consideration of the Council should it find that Israel is in breach of its obligations. And this request was followed up at senior level with the Cabinet of President von der Leyen on the 12th of March. It was also discussed by European Union foreign ministers at the Foreign Affairs Council on the 18th of March. And while this initiative does not enjoy the support of all European Union partners, it remains my firm view that the European Commission should respond in a meaningful manner to the Irish-Spanish request. And this was further emphasised by the Taoiseach when he met with President von der Leyen on the 11th of April. Ireland's request regarding the European Union-Israel Association Agreement is just one element in our efforts to shape European Union policy in the context of the current crisis. It is also consistent with our overall approach, which is grounded in respect for international law. In my view, the European Union can and should do much more to use the levers at its disposal to exert pressure on Israel. And this will remain a priority for my continuing engagement at European Union level. The importance of Ireland's intensive efforts through bilateral diplomatic channels, coordination with like-minded partners, leadership within the European Union, and our clear and principled voice at the United Nations are fully understood and appreciated by our Palestinian and international partners.
And I am pleased to see that by February the Irish Government had moved to this point. But when I wrote to the Commission last in November, and then my colleagues in the independent group as well, because if you read the Trade Association Agreement carefully, you will see that Article 2 is very clear, because Article 2 states that the provisions of the agreement shall be based on respect for human rights and democratic principles to guide internal and international policy and constitutes an essential element of this agreement. I voted for that agreement in the European Parliament, and we spent a lot of time looking at trade deals and at the carrot and stick aspect, as it were. And it makes a mockery of it, and I don't say that lightly. But if at this point the European Union is not reviewing that trade agreement, what is the point in us voting for something like that? And I have to say that when I raised this issue initially, the response was not positive from the Irish Government, but I know you have come round to it. So is there anything else that can be done at this point to move them forward so that the EU can, in fact, stand over what's in its own trade agreements?
I welcome the contribution you just made. I think you're correct that when we sign and support association agreements, when the European Union does, these clauses have to mean something, and particularly Israel's compliance with the essential elements clause of the agreement. And I believe that the Commission needs to do a review. Now, I know Giuseppe Borrell has initiated a discussion on this, and also I understand some work has been done in the context of the External Action Service in respect of assessing this. But fundamentally, the letter from Prime Minister Sanchez and former Taoiseach Varadkar was requesting that the Commission would carry out a review of the association agreement in terms of whether or not those clauses were being fulfilled adequately by Israel. And it's our view that those clauses have to mean, and we're clear that there's been a breach of international humanitarian law by Israel in Gaza, and what's happening to the people, the Palestinians in Gaza, is absolutely unacceptable by any humanitarian yardstick.
Well, thank you for that, Tánaiste. And as I said, I do appreciate your work in this. But at the same time, we are a party to this trade agreement. We signed it. We voted for it in the European Parliament, and you as a government ratified it. So you therefore have a responsibility as an individual government to do whatever you can, and I know you did in February. As I said, I raised it with Minister Coveney back in November, and at that point he talked about the agreements between the EU and the State of Israel do not apply to territories occupied by Israel in 1967, but I pointed out to him, of course, that it's all international agreements as well as national. It's not just about inside their territory, it's outside. And I think, you know, we're looking at Europe Day, we're looking at trust in the European project and that we mean what we say. And this is an example of where we can show that we mean what we say. I thank you for your work in it, Tánaiste, but I ask you to do the very best you can to get that agreement reviewed, because that would be a very strong signal from the European Union. I believe it needs to be suspended, but we can't wait any longer to show that Europe actually does mean what it says.
Could I say, first of all, again, as you know, the trade relations between the European Union and Israel are governed by a free trade area that is part of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. And that agreement actually was signed as far back as 1995 and entered into force in 2000, and it forms the basis for relations between the European Union and Israel, governing the trade relationship as well as including political aspects. The last Association Council took place in October of 2022 following a delay of 10 years. And in principle, if the EU and its member states form the view that there is a serious and persistent violation of the requirement to respect human rights as an essential element of the association agreement, and that the situation is one of special urgency, it could seek to rely on Article 79 to suspend the agreement in whole or in part. Now, we believe that is the case, and that's why we've written with the Spanish government to the Commission for a review on this. And in doing so, there is a requirement to give priority to those measures which least disturb the functioning of the agreement. A Council decision would be required to suspend an association agreement, with unanimity likely to be the applicable voting rule. And so we've requested that the Commission would undertake an urgent review of whether Israel is complying with its obligations, including under the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which makes respect for human rights and democratic principles an essential element of the relationship, and if it considers that it is in breach and that it proposes appropriate measures to the Council to consider.